Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Delon D'Souza. Coming up, the US president gears up for a high-stakes visit to China, but the war in Iran set to hang like a dark cloud over Donald Trump's trip as both sides seek to reset ties. Plus, we'll be meeting an Australian artist of Indian descent who's currently in residency in Paris. His work raises questions of identity and culture in a post-colonial framework. The US president is due in China starting May 14th for a two-day visit. Donald Trump making the historic trip after a tumultuous year between the two largest economies in the world. First, a back-and-forth trade spat broke out last year after Washington ramped up tariffs on Beijing, and now tensions are simmering once again over the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We can now bring in France 24's business editor, Camille Knight. Camille, good to see you. Talk us through how China is faring economically.
Well, for the first 2 months or so of the war in Iran, it was looking fairly resilient. It has massive strategic oil reserves, it controls its own fuel prices, and it's been investing in renewables for years now. So while the rest of Asia really struggled on the energy front, Beijing was actually in a position to help countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, even Australia, positioning itself as a really stable energy partner. On paper, the economy grew at 5.3% in the first quarter. Most of that strength, though, was concentrated in January and February, and it's still quite early to tell the full effects of the war on China. But there are some warning signs already. China's export figures plunged in March whilst imports surged. That's because the closure of the Strait of Hormuz weakened global demand while pushing up the cost of raw materials. So manufacturing has become much more expensive, which means companies' profits are being squeezed while unsold goods start piling up in warehouses. Manufacturing, of course, is about a quarter of China's GDP, so a hit to the sector is a hit to the entire economy. Car sales also tend to be quite a good indicator for economists, and those plunged 26% in the first 3 weeks of April, those mostly dragged down by a slump in gasoline car sales.
And Kemi, we know it's not just the war that's been taking its toll.
Yeah, China's now feeling the squeeze from two directions: the Iran war, which of course is bringing up manufacturing costs, but also US tariffs that at their peak went beyond 100%. Now, the Supreme Court, you'll remember, recently struck down Trump's broadest tariffs, with the trade court even ruling Trump's global 10% tariffs are illegal. That does give China a sort of legal boost going into these talks. Both China and the US are also applying some pressure ahead of the visit by launching investigations into each other's trade practices. But the damage, of course, of kind of a year of trade war has taken its toll, and some analysts warn that China's growth target of 4.5% might be hard to hit.
We'll see what comes out of that meeting. Thank you very much for that, Camille Knight there. We can now bring in Steve Tsang, director of the SOAS China Institute. Thank you for joining us on the program today. The war in Iran is far from over. The US, as we know, continues to shift the goalposts. Does this lack of strategy benefit China at all?
Oh, absolutely. The American invasion or attack on Iran is creating both a nightmare for China in terms of the economic fallout, but also a godsend in terms of how much damage it is doing to American global standing and the American alliance system with other democracies, and therefore the capacity for the United States to work with other democracies to counter China's global ambition.
Now, this conflict has also exposed how isolated the United States is on the world stage. How does China view what a mess the US has gotten itself into?
Well, I think the Chinese look at it in a very positive way, which is that Donald Trump is delivering what China would have liked to deliver, but was not able to secure. China is competing against the United States for international recognition and acceptance, particularly in the global South, and working to divide the democratic West. And Donald Trump has delivered both of that. The fallout from the Iran war is hugely damaging both to Americans standing in the global South and to Americans' capacity to work with its European allies.
So you're saying that China got what it wanted by default by just sitting on its hands and just watching what happened?
Yes, except that in the longer term, if the war continues for longer, then the Chinese will have to pay a very significant economic price to it, because China is the single largest trading nation in the world. And the closing of the Strait of Hormuz in the longer term will have a stronger impact on the Chinese economy than on any other.
True.
And in the short term, the existence of the huge strategic oil reserve can only deal with the short-term shortfall, but not a long-term situation.
And when it comes to trade, are we likely to see a breakthrough on that front or get an extension of the trade truce in place?
Oh, I think the chance is that both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump wants to do a kind of a deal in the trade front. The Chinese understand Donald Trump pretty well, and they know that Donald Trump is out there to do a deal and is less concerned about the substance of the deal. So they will present something that will enable Donald Trump to declare that he's got a deal, a good deal for America, and for something that Xi Jinping can also say he's got a good deal for China. But whatever China agrees to may not be fully delivered when the time comes.
And will the ongoing war in Iran affect U.S. strategy vis-a-vis Taiwan?
Probably not hugely. Taiwan is seen by the United States as of a kind of strategic importance that, for example, Ukraine does not figure in the Trump administration's calculation. And the United States will see Taiwan as something that is central to the competition with China. So there is probably not going to be a huge change for that. And the Chinese will also see that the Americans are not going to let Taiwan go easily. And therefore, they will not take the risk of taking military actions against Taiwan simply because Donald Trump is distracted in the war, over the war in Iran.
Interesting point. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today, Steve Sang there. Sid Pattni is an Australian artist who is currently in residence at the Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris. His work raises questions of identity and culture through a post-colonial framework. The 39-year-old of Indian descent hopes to contribute to the discourse surrounding diasporic belonging. Sid, thank you for joining us on the program today. You were born in London, moved to Kenya, and then ended up in Australia when you were 13 years old. Did those experiences early on in life push you towards the arts?
Yeah, most definitely. So a lot of my work explores what it means to come and migrate from very different countries and experiences. So I have an ancestral background in India, but I've only been to India twice in my life, and I've also lived in Australia for best part of 20 to 25 years. So a lot of my work is about exploring what it means to be in the in-between, not quite belonging to an Indian ancestral homeland, and also not quite belonging in an Australian context as well, and what it means to what does personhood and selfhood look like when you're sort of in between cultures and places.
How did your experience in Australia from when you were 13 years old onwards shape your work? Because, I mean, clearly you've made the country home as well.
It's very much home, but in the process of becoming home, there was a lot of assimilation that had to occur. And I use that term very carefully because for me, what assimilation meant was survival. So when I migrated to Australia, I was 13 years old. And to fit into that context and to survive in that context, I had to adopt a lot of Australian mannerisms and ways of being in an Australian culture. And in doing so, I lost a lot of my Indian ancestral lineage and cultural background. I almost discarded that in order to survive in that system. So for me, the work, comes from that place. It's generative from that place. What it means to be call a place home, but also have some tensions underlying that.
Is that why your work, the subjects in your work don't have faces, don't have identities?
Yeah, that's partly the reason. I think that the figures that I portray in a lot of my artworks are these colonial era figures that we've probably all seen over the years. I studied them at art school. So to rob them of their faces is to rob them of a sense of their agency that they had over me. A lot of the admirals, kings, queens that I portray in my artworks are people that had a direct consequence of my family's migration history, from India to Kenya to Australia, and has therefore informed my identity. So they've had a lot of power over me from a long time ago. So to rob them of that agency is part of the process of why I do that.
I mean, your work speaks to me as somebody who's Indian, who grew up in different parts of the world. I'm just wondering, is your work accessible to everyone, to the broader public?
I'd hope so. The feedback has been that it's been accessible to the broader public. I think people that don't come from backgrounds such as perhaps we do can still see that story and commonalities of that story, because that story of colonialism has happened not just in India, it's happened across the world.
Yeah.
So I think it's a story that speaks to a broad audience, but it's also quite it's quite nice and gratifying to see people from the diaspora, especially South Asian diaspora, reach out and feel seen in the works that I made. So for me, I had very little of that growing up. So to have that for me is special.
You said that when you were growing up in Australia, you kept your Indian identity hidden as best you could. I'm just curious, what was it like when you visited India? Did you feel the sense of belonging suddenly or not?
I'd hoped to. So when I went there for an artist residency, and I'd really hoped to reclaim these parts of India that I had never really accessed throughout my childhood and adolescence. And I quickly, came to the understanding that I was never going to be Indian enough for India. While I appeared Indian, I had very Western mannerisms, ways of being and operating in the world, and I was quickly found out to not be from that place. So for me, it was about realizing that I actually was never going to be Indian enough for Indians themselves. And that was actually, an interesting process for me, because that's where my work comes from, is not being quite from India, not being quite from Australia, and finding that liminal space in between.
Now, Indians have become Australia's largest migrant group, overtaking the English for the first time. What does this mean to you, and is this something you're proud of?
I think it's always interesting, and I think I'm excited to see what this project of migration into Australia is going to bring, be it from Indian backgrounds, be it from British backgrounds, Chinese. We've got a storied history with that. I'm interested to see what it does to the project of multiculturalism in Australia. It's still a very young country. It's still grappling with its First Nations histories. So to have this confluence of cultures, ethnicities, backgrounds, identities, I'm excited to see how they sort of, amalgamate themselves in that culture to form an Australia that's still trying to understand what it is itself as a country.
Any worries at all?
I think there's always worries, because minorities and communities that are coming into, pre-existing frameworks always face backlash, especially when you have things like economic crisis, household crises. But I really do look at it from a very optimistic lens, in the sense that, these people from these diverse cultures can bring so much to a country and reframe the idea of multiculturalism and how we use that term in an Australian context, that they can only add, I hope, to that culture rather than take away.
We'll see what happens. Thank you very much, Sid, for coming and speaking to us here on the program today.
Thank you.
And that's it for this edition of Access Asia. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.